So one of the things with grief, divorce, or death loss is actually accepting the reality that this is my life now. This has changed, right?
They've lost their adult children in the last, say, 3 years, and it's just devastating for them. Hi, everyone. This is Shaelene McInnis with Books in Line and also with the Ontario Wellness Network. I'm very happy to introduce you to Karen Omand, and she is a thanatologist. This is, I hadn't heard of it before I met her, and I'm fascinated by it now. So first of all, I'm going to ask Karen to explain to us the work that she does, and a reminder that we will always include her contact information along with the podcast. But again, if you'd like to call Books in Line and we could do an introduction, that's absolutely fine. She has a lot of really great things to share with us today. Hi, Karen. How are you?
Thanks for having me.
Thanks. I think you should explain that.
Yeah. So I'm a thanatologist. So I'm a certified thanatologist. It's quite we're quite rare breeds. I got my degree at University of Western. I think the degree is about maybe 17 years old. So it's quite new. And it's all focused on bereavement, grief, and loss. And that also includes, obviously, death loss is a major bulk, but there's also a lot of non-death losses, which is divorce and other things that, like a lot of other non-death losses. So that's how I got in. I got into it because of personal reasons, death of my parents very suddenly when I was in my 30s. And I just gravitate toward it. So that's how I started into this rare thanatology life I lead.
There's so many people who need the help you're talking about. There's so many people who need the help. This kind of help. Let's talk about it in terms of, how about if we talk about it in terms of divorce first, and then we'll talk about it in other forms of grief.
I'll tell you how I actually, in one of the courses we have to take, it's called non-death losses. And it's all about life that we experience as non-death losses, which we've all experienced. And there's so many of them, we can't even count them, right? But divorce is one of the hardest ones of non-death loss. And one of my professors, actually in her textbook states that for some people, divorce can be harder than a death loss. Now, as a thanatologist, I have, difference, or I understand that, and it's really hard. And so, she has a point there, because divorce can go on and on, especially if there's high conflict, right? Like, they're exhausting. And what's interesting is the symptoms that people feel when they go through a divorce, like those, the detachment distress, we call it, is almost similar to a death loss. And a lot of people aren't aware of that.
Actually, something, I work with a lot of people who are going through divorce, and I think you're exactly right. One of the things that I talk about is that a lot of people grieve the loss of their marriage, because for them, it's their way of life is suddenly gone. The future they planned is suddenly gone. And I can see that with divorce. Absolutely. I can see that people would feel grief, and I can see it being a bigger thing than, even the passing of someone else. One of the other things that you were talking about was loss of pets. I didn't even think of that.
Yeah. So I've even had a couple of clients over the years that have come because they're so, I'm an animal lover. I know you're an animal lover. Grieving the loss of a pet, there's that unconditional love, right? And so the thing about grief, and the thing what's really important is we grieve when we are attached. And so when we go through an attachment distress, it's really hard. One of my professors made it, like, when we were on a training, and she said that you may have somebody come in and you think they're grieving about their brother that died. So you're in that assumption, and they come, they write the form out, and they come into your office and they're crying, and you assume, which, you have to be careful, but she's like, no, it's my dog I'm really sad about. because of the attachment, right? So when someone gets divorced or loses a pet, your detachment distress, and I just want to make mention that when we have detachment distress, it's not just stress, it's also physiological, physical, mental, emotional. So even our brains go through a process of grief, right? So it's all, our whole body is, and our mind and our everything is grieving. And one of the other things that's interesting with grief is that you may know that you're getting a divorce or that this death happened. Okay. So intellectually, you're like, okay, I know, but here, it takes a long time to catch up. So it's like, you think there's you think, there's still a lot of distance to connect with your emotional being, saying, I accept the reality. So one of the things with grief, divorce, or death loss is actually accepting the reality that this is my life now. This has changed, right?
Yes.
Lot to unpack.
I think so too. I've had dogs my whole life. And I had one, and I loved that dog more than anything. And when she passed away, I was just sick to my stomach. I was so upset. And something though that I realize people do, and now I make sure not to do it, is they say, but it's just a dog. Like it's not, and you shouldn't be crying for 2 weeks. You should be past that. Why don't you just go get another dog? And so people do that. I'm like, and because people would say that to me, and it just corners you even more, or gets you, I don't know, you feel more isolated as you can't share with anyone.
People do not do grief well. Okay. We do not, to get back to divorce or even to pet loss is disenfranchised much, right? So you could be like, like you're just go get another dog. That just totally disenfranchised, like it totally not validates you. And same with divorce. Like you get like, okay, you finally left a tough marriage, and you could get one person saying, well, what took you so long?
Oh yeah.
Or you could be saying, another one that's supportive, right? So divorce is also very subjective in nature on how you get support from that as well, because some people are like, oh, well, everybody's getting divorced. It doesn't really matter. You're just one of the 50% now. Well, that doesn't mean that the struggle and the grief that you're going through isn't really hard, because as you know really well, none of us get married to get divorced. That's just not, we don't walk the aisle going, oh, this is great, let's get divorced, right?
No.
That's not how it works, right? So it's pretty hard.
Yeah. It is. It's, I make sure not to invalidate people by saying things like that. And it's the same thing as with marriage. People will often say, I've heard my clients tell me, people say, but you were lucky to get rid of them, just, why aren't you happy? Now you're free or whatever. But it's still, people do not walk down the aisle thinking they're going to get divorced. I'm going to ask you something. So can you give me a couple of ideas about how, if someone can recognize that, oh, I'm in grief? Like, how would, because I know people don't know.
Yeah, so people don't know. That's another thing I mentioned to you, is that a lot of people don't even know that they're grieving, right? So one of the things I do is, because I'm also a grief educator as well, and grief counseling, but one of the things I do a lot is just validate that people are like, my stomach's upset, or I have, like you mentioned with your dog, like well, that's because you're in, you're in stress. So grief is a chronic stress condition, right? It's not, we may have one day, oh, this has been a bad day. Well, with grief, it's a chronic stressful situation, right? Especially divorce. It's really heightened. So your body's going through a lot. So you may get headaches. You may get cognitive brain fog, right? Where you're doing funny things. That's a lot of people. I've had a lot of people, even with divorce counseling I've done, it's like, I can't remember things like I used to. Like things are, like things are off. And I'm like, it's because your brain is bottom heavy right now, right? You're not getting the same blood flow into the upper cortex brain right here than we do, because we're under chronic stress hormones, right? So there's that. There's indigestion is huge. A lot of people get upset stomach. They either don't eat or they eat. So it's either So either or. I've had it. I've had a lot that lose a lot of weight. So those are three on the top of my head. I mean, I have a whole list of like symptoms, like there's so many that, and the thing about grief is it's so unique to everybody. that I could say what, you could tell me what yours are, and then the next person beside me would be totally different, right? But most people, like, until they become aware of their coping systems, and if they've gone through a lot of stress before, a lot of death loss, don't really understand, can be like kind of shocked of like, wow, this is what grief can do to me. They can. A lot of people get sick right after as well.
They do, eh?
Yeah, their bodies.
I'm going to ask you something. We haven't discussed this at all, but say I have a friend who's grieving, and I have a few friends who are unfortunately in very deep grief. What would you suggest that maybe I try to do for her to just show support?
So one thing, show up. Okay. You may get pushed back. Right.
I'm writing this down.
Right. Because sometimes when you're grieving hard, you go inward.
Yes.
Right. And that's fine. That's what they're doing. But you want to just show up. And if they say, thank you, but not today, respect that. But then 2 or 3 days later, show up. Like, you know what I mean? I don't want you, you don't want them like, going down their throat, but just being there. Because the thing with grievers is, even with the divorce, there's not even a ritual when a divorce is done, but there's no, after a certain time, that's it. There's no support, right? Like, everybody's there for, the announcement of a divorce, or not even very well, but say with grief, like a death loss, the funerals happen, you get support, but everything starts trickling off.
Yes. Yeah.
And then they are left alone.
Yeah.
In their own grief. And it could be, death of a child, death of a spouse, death of a parent, death of a sibling. And they're still grieving, because that grief, there's no closure. In grief, it's integration.
Yes. Oh, that's really a good point. Yeah. I'm thinking I have a number of clients, accounting clients, and they've lost their adult children in the last, say, 3 years. And it's just devastating for them. And when you're speaking with them, because I don't usually talk about personal stuff because they're clients, they're not friends, but you can see they've changed so much from when they've just completely speak differently. There's more pauses, or they have to think harder about things. And it's awful. It's awful for that.
It's child loss. There's no competition in grief. Everybody, you lose your dog, you lose your sibling, you lose your, so in grief, how grief is in a bubble, if I say like this, everybody grieves. Okay. So you have grief here, but all along the edges, you have different types of grief, like different types of losses. So loss of a child, loss of a sibling, loss of a pet, but you also have the circumstances, right? So that kind of incorporates in how I counsel people too, right? Because it's not just, death of a child. Well, how did they die? So that has to come into play. But the point is even though all grief is kind of unique, but we're all kind of how we cope with it, right? Like in this thing, they're little slightly different between how the losses are. Right. Right. So the death of a child is different than death of a parent. Right. Just not in how we grieve. Like we grieve, we all grieve how we grieve, right? But it's more my field. I know that there's slight differences between a sibling loss, which is, to be honest, the longest relationship you ever have, right? Right. It's a lot of history with a sibling, right? Right. Child loss, it's not normal.
Yeah, it's unnatural. That's what they say to me. They say this isn't yet natural.
And it is very, very, very hard. Yes. And a spouse loss is you've lost your foundation. And that's where it comes to kind of like a divorce, right? Like you've lost that secure, safe haven, we call it in my field, for spousal loss. Right. And a parent, that's a pivotal person in your life, right? Yeah. And who loves you like your mom and dad? Right. In a good, healthy relationships, right? Yes. But so there, you understand there's uniqueness in all these little deaths and non-death too, right? Like those also have different ways of coping and different ways of strategies on how I help people anyways.
That was very interesting. I never thought of that. So I would like, can you tell us how people can reach out to you if they would like to hire you and to help them?
Yeah, so I'm at a boutique in Halton here that I do Zoom as well as in person, and I'm there 2 times a week. And then I do online counseling. And that I think I gave you my email for that.
I'm sure you would have. Yeah. We'll make sure I got it.
And then I also, so because of the heaviness of the grief world, I decided to start doing divorce, non-death loss help grief, because there is that as well. So that's divorceworkshop.ca. That's the website, but also Karen at divorceworkshop.com, I think, or .ca. Anyways, so
I'll post it.
Because I noticed that there's a lot of grief with divorce. So
right, and you and I both know, me being in accounting, like the divorce rate seems to have really skyrocketed over COVID, and so I think the work that you're doing is invaluable. And just so everyone knows, I know that Karen will be coming out with a book shortly to help people who are grieving and divorcing. Is that correct? Did I say that right?
Yeah. So it when I went through my own divorce, I was married for 19 years. It's been kind of high conflict, so it's been challenging. I noticed there wasn't a lot out there. Like there's not a lot out there. Like your book is great. Thankfully, we have that now. And I know there's more coming, and I know that we're starting to become better educated at it, but I felt like I was a fish out of water.
Yeah.
Like the only thing I knew how to do, well, I guess I see a lawyer, because that's how we've been programmed, right? Like I didn't know, like, well, how do I co-parent now? And my emotions are all over the place. And what do I do financially? And like, how do I recover from this? So in this workbook, we've cut it into 6 foundational units of an engaging workbook where you have to actually take a pen and paper, like pen to the workbook, where there's going to be self-tests, self-reflection. Some really neat things in there. We've spent about 2.5 years working on it, and it's just, it's kind of like another baby in a way. But I just want people to those who are exploring or thinking about or in a divorce, that it's just a good foundational, like learn from this. And then if you need to see a specialist like you, or a financial advisor, or like you, or a lawyer, a mediator, or an accountant, or whatever, like a therapist,
real estate agent.
Real estate agents, that's a good one. There's so many, but this is just to help you through, just to give you a start to understand what it's really like to navigate, because it's not as easy as we all think.
Right. No, and there's not a lot out there on this subject actually at all. So again, I'd like to remind everyone, if you're going through grief, or you think you might be, even if you're not sure, contact Karen, because I mean, she Karen was talking about stuff. I'm going, oh yes, I should think about that. So I hope, I want to thank Karen for being a guest on this show. Her information is absolutely invaluable, and we'll be speaking more. I'll be meeting up with her after her book is done, and we can take a look at that book. Thank you so much, Karen. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.
And thank you for having me.
Of course.